The invitation that erased us. I'm a woman who learned, very early, how silence can be louder than insults. 3 weeks before my mother's birthday, I won custody of my daughter. There was no celebration. No hugs, no victory speech. Just me, sitting alone in my car outside the courthouse, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe like someone who was finally allowed to exhale. For 2 years, my life had been one long pause. And then my phone buzzed. A family group message. Birthday dinner details. One short paragraph. Heirs only, no dead ends, do not bring your daughter. I stared at the screen. Read it again. Slower this time. That wasn't a typo. That wasn't poor wording. That was deliberate. They weren't just talking about me. They were talking about my 6-year-old child. I looked over at her on the couch beside me, one sock half off, hair tangled. Still clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd slept with since she was 2. The kind of sleep that trusts the world. And in 3 lines of text, my family erased her. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I sent one sentence. I won't be coming. The response came instantly. Good, we don't need drama on a milestone day. No follow-up, no hesitation, no shame. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not broken, not angry, just finished, because this wasn't sudden. It was only honest. In my family, worth had a hierarchy. It always had. Sons carried the name. Daughters were expected to carry themselves somewhere else. And I had violated the unspoken rule. I hadn't disappeared politely. I hadn't failed quietly. I'd stayed. And I'd brought a daughter with me. That made me inconvenient. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that while they were deciding who belonged at their table, I had been building something of my own. Quietly, legally, publicly. So when my mother's birthday dinner arrived, in the same restaurant they believed would crown their legacy, they weren't just going to see me. They were going to understand what it costs to erase someone who no longer needs your permission to exist. And once that door opened, there would be no way to pretend they hadn't seen me. The rules. I was never meant to survive to understand why that message didn't surprise me. You have to understand how my family worked. Not the house. The rules. Love wasn't loud there, it was conditional. My father ran our home the way he ran his company, efficient, structured, unquestioned. He used the word values. What he meant was order. My older brother was the future. My younger brother was insurance. And I was acceptable, as long as I didn't ask for anything. I learned quickly that effort didn't matter if it came from the wrong place. When I brought home straight A's, the paper disappeared into a drawer. When my brother passed a class he'd almost failed, it became a story. When I earned a scholarship, my father said, "Well, that saves money." A week later, he flew across the country for my brother's orientation and called it legacy. I stopped trying to translate after that. My mother noticed. She was the only one who ever did. After dinners where my father toasted the boys, she'd find me rinsing dishes that weren't mine and say quietly, "You don't disappear just because someone refuses to look." She died when I was 15. Cancer doesn't negotiate. It removes the last soft thing in the room and leaves you with whatever's underneath. After that, the rules hardened. There's a photo in my father's living room. 3 men, same last name, same smile, no women. No daughters, no granddaughters. That picture wasn't an accident. It was a boundary. I married young because leaving felt easier than staying invisible. I thought love would be different. When I got pregnant, my husband said it wasn't part of his plan. He left before fear could even catch up to me, so it became just me, a baby, and a life I built quietly. And it worked, until power came looking for me. 5 years later, my ex returned with lawyers. Not because he wanted to raise our daughter, because he could, because power recognizes power. The custody battle lasted 2 years. 2 years of waiting, 2 years of being careful. That's when my father reappeared, not as a parent but as a solution. He agreed to help in court, to testify, to say the words that mattered, but help came with expectations. Show up, stay agreeable, don't disrupt the image. So I complied. Every holiday, every dinner. Also, a man who never chose me would stand in a courtroom and pretend he loved my child. When the judge ruled in my favor, I thought the leash had been removed. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, my phone buzzed. Heirs only, no dead ends. That message wasn't about a birthday, it was a reminder of where they thought I belonged. What they didn't realize, what they couldn't see yet, was that the custody ruling didn't just give me my daughter, it removed their leverage. And when leverage disappears, people like my father don't apologize, they panic. Which is why the birthday dinner mattered. because it wasn't just a celebration. It was the last place they expected the truth to walk in without asking permission. And when it did, it wouldn't be quiet. The call that changed the seating, I didn't react right away. That was new for me. After the message, heirs only. No dead ends, I didn't spiral, didn't cry, didn't start drafting speeches I'd never be allowed to finish. I waited. Because when you grow up under rules like theirs, you learn something important. Pain demands reaction. Timing demands restraint. My daughter was asleep when I finally stood up, curled into herself. One knee bent, one sock missing, breathing steady, the kind of sleep that means the world hasn't disappointed you yet. I watched her longer than necessary, not out of fear, out of precision. Everything I did next had to protect that sleep. I went into the kitchen, poured a glass of water I didn't drink, and opened my laptop at the same table where I paid bills and helped with spelling words. That's where I checked the calendar. Not to imagine anything, not to hope. To confirm, there it was, the annual executive dinner. Invite only, private room, same restaurant, same night. Same start time as my mother's birthday celebration. I hadn't planned it that way, I didn't need to. This dinner had been on my calendar for months. I just hadn't told my family, because they'd never once asked what I did anymore. I stared at the event details for a moment. Then I picked up my phone. It was after midnight. Late enough that only people who understand stakes still answer. She picked up on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call, she said. No small talk, no surprise. She'd seen everything unfold from a distance. The marriage, the custody fight, the way my father suddenly reappeared not as a parent, but as leverage. I'm not attending the birthday dinner, I said. A pause. Then quietly, I assumed. I'll be at the other table. Another pause, longer this time. You're sure? She asked. Yes. Good, she said. Because you're not just attending, you're being introduced. That was the first moment my heart rate changed. Introduced, not as someone's daughter, not as someone's mistake, as a decision maker. They don't know, do they? I asked. No, she said, and if they did, they'd try to stop it. I smiled then, not wide, not pleased, just aware. What happens if they see me? I asked. Her answer came without hesitation. Then the room will understand who you are before they do. I hung up and sat alone in the quiet kitchen, the refrigerator humming like it always did, indifferent to power, unmoved by legacy. Over the next few days, the family group chat stayed active. Menus, dress codes, guest confirmations, I wasn't included. No one asked if I was coming. They'd already written me out. That was their mistake. Because while they were arranging flowers and arguing over seating, my name was being printed on a place card. One that came with expectations, not explanations. On the morning of the dinner, my daughter asked what I was doing that night. Work dinner, I said. She thought about that. Then asked, the kind where people listen to you. I froze, then nodded. Yes, that kind. She smiled, satisfied, and went back to her cereal. As I dropped her off later, she waved without knowing that across the city, a family that shared her blood was celebrating a future they believed she had no place in. And for the first time, that knowledge didn't hurt. Because that night, in a room full of people who understood influence, my absence from one table was going to make another table very uncomfortable. And someone who had spent a lifetime deciding who counted, was about to realize they'd misread the room. Where the room relearned my name, the restaurant hadn't changed. Same warm lighting, same heavy curtains, same polished floors that reflected confidence back at you if you walked in believing you belonged. As a child, this place had scared me. Not because it was elegant, but because it was where my family rehearsed importance. I arrived early, not nervously early, professionally early. The host checked the reservation, scanned the list once, then looked up at me with a nod that landed clean. Yes, he said, they're expecting you. No hesitation, no follow-up, just certainty. He gestured forward, and we walked past the main dining area, past the long table filling with familiar laughter, glasses clinking, stories I already knew the endings to. That's when I saw them. My father sat near the center, posture unchanged, scanning the room the way men like him always do, not for people but for hierarchy. Beside him sat his wife, my stepmother, perfectly composed, smile intact, eyes alert. My brother leaned back in his chair, relaxed in the way only inheritance teaches. They didn't see me. Why would they? I had never entered this place with authority before. The host stopped at a door just beyond their table. This way, he said quietly. I stepped into the private room. The difference was immediate: lower voices, straighter posture, attention that wasn't borrowed from last names. As the door closed behind me, the host said my name. Clearly, correctly. Conversation paused, not dramatically but instinctively. That's when I felt it. Behind me, laughter from the main table faltered. A sentence died halfway through. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew my father would be standing halfway out of his chair by now, recalculating. I knew my brother would still be seated, frozen between denial and recognition. I took my seat. In front of me was a place card. My name. No surname, no qualifier, no relationship attached, just mine. Someone across the table smiled. Glad you could join us, they said. We've been looking forward to your perspective. Your perspective, not my past, not my choices. Not my explanations. The discussion moved easily, numbers, outcomes, decisions that carried weight beyond this room. I spoke when asked. I listened when it mattered. I didn't try to prove anything. And then the door opened again. This time I heard him before I saw him. I'm sorry, my father said, voice controlled but raised just enough. I think you're seated at the wrong table. The room went still, not awkward still, curious still. I turned slowly. No, I said, I'm not. He stepped closer, smile tightening. This room is private. Yes, the host said gently, appearing at his side. It's reserved for the executive dinner. The word executive landed like a dropped glass. My father's eyes moved from the faces to the place cards to the posture of the people seated there. And then, finally to me, understanding arrived late. But it arrived. I stood not to confront him but to clarify. Good evening, I said evenly. This session is closed. A pause. Then someone at my table added pleasantly, we'll rejoin the main dining area later if time allows. That was it. Contained, public, irreversible, my father nodded once. He didn't argue, he didn't apologize, because power doesn't raise its voice when it realizes it's misread the room. He stepped back. As the door closed again, conversation resumed, but something fundamental had shifted. At the main table, chairs scraped softly as people adjusted. Glances followed the door a second too long. Someone laughed too loudly, too late. Celebration continued, but certainty did not. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being corrected. I was the variable they hadn't accounted for. And the night, the real consequences of it, were just beginning. What followed me out of the room I didn't leave right away. That surprised them. They expected distance to look like retreat. They expected me to disappear the way I always had, quietly, conveniently, without disrupting the evening further. Instead, I stayed. The meeting continued, but something subtle had changed. People spoke with a little more care. Questions landed heavier. Decisions took on names and timelines. I noticed it in the pauses. In the way someone checked with me before moving on. In the way another waited, just a beat longer for my response. That's how you know where you stand. Not by applause, by deference. When the session wrapped, chairs shifted back. Folders closed. People stood with the unhurried confidence of those who expect to be remembered. Someone touched my arm lightly. Good to finally meet you in person, they said. Finally, not nice, not interesting, finally. As I stepped back into the main dining area, the noise rushed in louder now, thinner somehow. My family's table had rearranged itself. My father sat straighter than before, jaw set. My brother avoided my eyes completely. My stepmother watched me the way women do when they're recalculating narratives. No one waved. No one smiled, but everyone noticed. I walked past without slowing. That, I think, was the first real consequence. Outside, the night air felt different, cooler, steadier, like it had been waiting. I was unlocking my car when my phone buzzed. My father's name. I stared at it. Not with dread, not with anticipation, with curiosity. I let it ring. A minute later, a text came through. We need to talk. I read it once. Then placed the phone face down on the seat beside me. Because that sentence, we need to talk, used to be a summons, a correction, a warning. Tonight, it was a request. I drove home without music, letting the silence do its work. At a red light, another message appeared. I didn't realize. That one almost made me laugh, not out loud. Just internally at the precision of it. Of course he hadn't realized. He'd never had to. When I got home, my daughter was asleep, sprawled sideways, blanket half on, rabbit missing. I found the toy under the bed and placed it back in her arms. She didn't wake. I stood there longer than necessary. Not because I was emotional, but because I was certain. The next morning, the family group chat was quiet. No follow-ups, no commentary, just absence. And absence, I'd learned, is information. Later that afternoon, my stepmother called. I let that ring too. Then came a message from my brother. Did you plan that? I typed 3 words. I planned my life. Then I put the phone down and went back to work. Because what they felt now wasn't anger. It was displacement. The slow, unsettling realization that the rules they'd relied on no longer protected them from being irrelevant. And that was something no apology could fix. But this wasn't the end. Not really, because power doesn't settle quietly when it shifts. It tests the ground. And soon, very soon, they were going to try to take something back. Something they thought was still theirs. They were wrong. When silence stopped being enough, it took 3 days. That's how long it took for silence to curdle into strategy. At first, nothing happened. No messages, no sudden apologies, no dramatic attempts at reconciliation. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels temporary. Like someone is holding their breath. I recognized it immediately. This was the pause before a move. On the 4th morning, my lawyer called, not alarmed, not rushed, careful. Have you spoken to your father recently? She asked. No, a pause. He reached out yesterday, asked a few questions, nothing improper yet. Yet, that word did a lot of work. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the window. The city outside moved the way it always did, unaware of lineage, uninterested in legacy. What kind of questions? I asked. She hesitated, just long enough to be intentional. About your custody agreement. About long-term arrangements. About stability. There it was, not concern, positioning. He wasn't trying to get my daughter back. He was trying to get access to the narrative, to the leverage, to the version of the story where he still mattered. I thanked her and hung up. For a moment I just sat there, because this was familiar territory. When I was younger, silence meant punishment, distance meant disapproval, and questions meant control. But this time something was different. I wasn't bracing, I was prepared. That afternoon a letter arrived. Handwritten envelope, heavy paper. My father's handwriting hadn't changed. Still precise. Still confident. Still assuming it would be opened immediately. I didn't open it. I set it on the counter and made tea instead, because urgency is a tool. And I wasn't picking it up for him anymore. That evening my stepmother texted, "We're worried about how this looks." I almost admired the honesty. Not how you're doing. Not how your daughter is. How this looks. I typed back one sentence. To whom, no reply. The next move came quietly, through people I hadn't expected. A mutual acquaintance reached out. Then another. Casual questions disguised as concern. Your father just wants what's best. He's been under a lot of stress. You know how proud he is. Proud. Of what? Of a system that only worked when I stayed small. That night, I sat at the edge of my daughter's bed and watched her sleep. Not because I was afraid, because I was alert. They weren't coming for me directly. Not yet. They were testing the perimeter, seeing what doors were still unlocked, what assumptions still held. That's when I understood something clearly for the first time. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted containment. They wanted me successful but quiet, visible but controlled, respected but not autonomous. And my daughter. She was the variable they still believed they could reframe. That was the line, the one they shouldn't have crossed. The next morning, I made 2 calls, one to my lawyer, one to someone my father didn't know I worked with. By noon, a process had started, slow, legal, irreversible. No confrontations, no warnings, just structure. Because the safest power doesn't shout, it documents. That evening, as I picked my daughter up from school, she ran toward me, backpack bouncing, smiling like nothing in the world had shifted. I knelt and hugged her, breathing her in. Are you okay, Mom? She asked suddenly. I smiled. I am now. Because whatever they were planning, they were already too late. They still thought this was about control. They didn't realize it was about protection. And once those two things stopped being confused, the rules changed permanently. The move they thought would break me, they didn't come loudly. That would have required confidence. They came carefully, indirectly, the way people do when they still believe they're entitled to outcomes. It started with a phone call I didn't answer. Unknown number, local, then another. By the 3rd attempt, I knew who it was. Not my father directly. He never risked being on record when he didn't have to. This was someone else, someone official enough to sound neutral, someone borrowed. The voicemail came minutes later. Measured, polite, practiced. This is regarding a routine inquiry connected to your custody arrangement. Please return the call at your earliest convenience. Routine, that word again. The favorite disguise of control. I didn't call back. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer. She responded with one line, they're testing jurisdiction. There it was, not concern, not safety, not my daughter's well-being. Reach. They were trying to see how far their name still carried. Later that afternoon, the school called. Nothing alarming, nothing dramatic, just a confirmation request. Had anyone else been authorized to pick up my daughter? I thanked them for checking, and said no. After I hung up, I sat very still, because this wasn't clumsy. It was calculated. They weren't trying to take her. They were trying to remind me that they could make things inconvenient. That they could introduce doubt, delay, paperwork. This was the family language I knew best, pressure without fingerprints. That evening my father finally called from his own number. I answered, not because I owed him, but because I wanted clarity. I hear you've been difficult, he said, skipping greeting. I almost smiled. About what? I asked, a pause. You embarrassed us, he said, publicly. There it was, not you worried us, not we were wrong, us. I attended a work function, I said calmly. I didn't mention you at all. That's not the point. No, I agreed, it isn't. Silence stretched. Then his tone shifted lower, more familiar. You're putting your daughter in a complicated position, he said. People notice instability. I felt it then, not fear, precision. She's stable, I replied. She's safe. And she's loved. You don't understand how this looks. I understand exactly how it looks, I interrupted gently. It looks like you're reaching. That landed. I could hear it in his breath. You think this ends well? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Because this was the moment he still believed he had leverage. It already has, I said. He scoffed, a reflex. You forget who taught you how the world works. No, I said. I remember. That's why I changed how I move in it. Another pause, then colder. You're making a mistake. I looked down the hallway toward my daughter's room. Her door was open, light spilling out. A quiet, ordinary night. No, I said softly. I'm correcting one. He hung up. 2 days later, the letter arrived. Not handwritten this time. Legal letterhead, formal language. Concern phrased as obligation. A suggestion carefully worded that revisiting certain arrangements might be prudent. I read it once. Then handed it to my lawyer. She read it too, and smiled. That's it, she said. Yes, she nodded. Good. That's when I knew. They'd overplayed the last card they had. Because the moment control pretends to be care, it exposes itself. And once exposed, it doesn't recover. They thought this move would scare me back into silence. Instead, it gave me something far more useful. Proof. And proof has a way of changing who the room listens to next. When their concern met daylight, they thought they were being subtle. That was the first mistake. The second was assuming silence meant fear. A week after the letter arrived, my lawyer called me into her office. Not urgently, not panicked. Just ready, they've escalated, she said, sliding a folder across the table. But not the way they think. Inside were copies of emails, formal, polite, concerned, requests made to institutions, inquiries framed as responsibility, language that sounded protective until you read it twice. They're positioning themselves as safeguards, she continued, which would be fine if there were safeguards needed. I nodded, because that was the gap they'd miscalculated. There was no chaos, no instability, no evidence that my daughter needed saving from anything except interference. They've created a record, my lawyer said, and records work both ways. That afternoon, something shifted, not privately. Publicly, a mutual contact reached out, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. I heard your family's worried, she said carefully, about everything. I let the silence stretch, then I answered honestly. They are, I said. They're worried about losing relevance. Another pause. I see, she said, and just like that the tone changed. Over the next few days I felt it happening, not dramatically, not all at once. Conversations recalibrated. Questions sharpened. Sympathy quietly rerouted. Because concern, when unsupported, starts to sound like accusation. And accusation demands proof. My father didn't have any. What he did have was history. A reputation for control disguised as order, and now documentation that showed a pattern. The first real crack appeared at a community event. I wasn't looking for it. Someone approached me, voice low. Is everything okay? She asked. There are stories, I smiled gently. Yes, I said, everything is stable, very stable. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. That's what I thought. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. My father. This time I answered. His voice sounded different. Not angry, not commanding, uncertain. I didn't expect people to take it this way, he said. I leaned back in my chair. Take what way? I asked. That we're interfering. I closed my eyes for a moment. Because you are, I said, and now they can see it. Silence, then quieter, we were just trying to help. No, I replied, you were trying to stay relevant. That was the moment something broke, not loudly but completely. Because relevance isn't something you can demand, and concern isn't something you can perform indefinitely. The calls slowed after that. The messages softened. The language shifted from instruction to inquiry. And inquiry, I'd learned, is what happens when power runs out of certainty. One evening, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she asked me something unexpected. Why don't we see Grandpa much anymore? I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, because I wanted the right one. Sometimes, I said slowly, people need time to learn new rules. She thought about that. Do we have rules? She asked. I smiled. Yes, I said. Ours are simple. She nodded, satisfied, and rolled over. As I turned off the light, my phone vibrated once more. A message from my stepmother. Your father is having a hard time with all this. I stared at it, then replied with the truth. So am I. The difference is, I'm not asking anyone else to carry it. I put the phone down, because by now the narrative had shifted. Their concern no longer sounded protective. It sounded exposed. And the world has very little patience for control once it loses the mask of care. But this wasn't the end. Because when people realize they've lost power publicly, they often try one last thing, a private appeal. The apology that asked for too much. It came late. Not late at night, late in meaning, long after the letters, after the phone calls slowed, after the world adjusted without them at the center. My father asked to meet, not at the restaurant, not in public, not anywhere symbolic, just coffee, a neutral place, a quiet corner, a request that sounded almost reasonable. I agreed, not because I owed him closure, but because I wanted to hear what losing sounded like. He was already there when I arrived. Older somehow, not physically, structurally. The posture was the same, the authority was not. We sat. For a moment, he studied his hands. That alone told me this conversation would be different. I didn't handle things well, he said finally. There it was, not an apology yet, a preface. I waited. He cleared his throat. We were raised a certain way, you know that. I nodded. I did know. That doesn't excuse it, he added quickly. But it explains it. That was the ask. Explanation as absolution. I see, I said. He looked up then, searching my face for something. Permission, maybe. I didn't think about how it would feel, he continued. To be excluded. I almost corrected him, erased, not excluded, but I let him keep his word. It mattered that he said it. I was wrong, he said. About your daughter, about you. There it was. The closest thing to an apology I was going to get, and still something was missing. I want us to move forward, he said. Put this behind us. I took a slow breath. That depends, I said, on what moving forward means to you. He hesitated. I want to be involved, he said. In her life, in yours. And just like that, the cost became clear. Forgiveness with access attached. I set my cup down carefully. You want restoration, I said, not repair. His brow furrowed. I don't understand the difference. I know, I replied gently. Silence settled between us. I'm not saying never, he added quickly. I'm saying eventually. I looked at him then, not as my father but as a man negotiating position. My daughter is not a bridge, I said quietly. She's not how you find your way back. He stiffened. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It's honest. His voice rose slightly. So what, you're punishing me? I shook my head. No, I said, I'm protecting her. He leaned back, exhaled sharply. I thought you'd be more understanding. That sentence told me everything. Understanding to him still meant concession. I am understanding, I said. That's why I'm saying no. We sat in that truth for a moment. Then he stood. I hope you don't regret this, he said. I looked up at him. I already lived the regret, I replied. This is the correction. He left without another word. I stayed until my coffee went cold, not because I was shaken, because I was relieved. Some apologies don't heal, they negotiate. And once you see the difference, you don't owe them your softness. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because forgiveness refused has consequences too, and I was about to learn what peace actually costs. The life that didn't ask for permission, nothing exploded after that. No final arguments, no dramatic fallout, no public reckoning that tied everything up neatly. Just quiet, a different kind than before. The kind that doesn't feel like punishment but like space. Weeks passed, then months, the calls stopped. The messages faded into formal politeness, then into absence. And the world kept moving. My daughter grew the way children do when they're not being watched for weaknesses, loud, curious, unafraid of taking up room. One afternoon, she asked me if she could invite friends over for her birthday. Of course, I said. Everyone? She asked. I smiled. Yes, I said, everyone. We planned the party together, cake flavors debated seriously, balloons chosen with conviction. No guest lists filtered by worth, no rules disguised as tradition, just joy. At work, things expanded quietly. Opportunities came not because of who I was related to, but because of what I'd built. Rooms opened. Doors stayed open. No one asked me where I came from anymore. They asked me where I was going. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about my father. Not with anger, not with longing, with clarity. I understood now that he hadn't lost me. He'd lost the version of me who would shrink to keep peace. And that loss was permanent. One evening, my daughter and I sat on the couch, legs tangled, watching something forgettable. She leaned her head against my shoulder. Mom, she said, yes. Are we a family? I felt my chest tighten, not painfully but fully. Yes, I said. We are, she smiled, satisfied with that simple answer. And in that moment, I understood something I'd spent my whole life missing. Legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you refuse to pass down. They had called us a dead end. But standing there, in a life that no longer asked for permission, I finally knew the truth. We weren't the end of anything. We were the beginning.